A UFO crashes on Spitsbergen, Norway. Okay, but how is it related to the assassination of President Kennedy? Let me tell you. I thought we need to have a break from this New World Order topic. It was stressful enough for 3 episodes on my channel when I talked about Project Blue Beam. So I thought this episode is gonna be less depressed. Who am I kidding? I must be honest, I simply wanted to share a story about a UFO crash in Spitsbergen, but it ended up with doing a really interesting research about one journalist in America and her very weird murder, and then there's also the assassination of JFK. Now, as I mentioned, this story is gonna bring us to Spitsbergen. I already had one very interesting video on my channel where I was telling a story of a mystery that happened there, so check out that video if you haven't seen that. I'm gonna link it at the description box. Apart from that, just a quick reminder, what is Spitsbergen? So, in the north part of Europe, there is an archipelago belonging to Norway called Spitsbergen, but most people nowadays call it Svalbard. Most of the land is covered with glaciers and intersected by many fjords, and the climate is more than harsh. Most of Spitsbergen is not very much touched by people. However, out there are some stories that tell that during the 40s and 50s, there have been some UFO vehicle crashes or UFO sightings. And I must say that this is kind of like a pattern. If you remember the videos that I covered before about UFOs in Scandinavia, then you will remember that during that time, there have been a lot of sightings over Scandinavia. And if we look at it from like a broader angle, it's not only Scandinavia, it's the world. I mean, since people started to more actively self-destruct, the reports about extraterrestrial visits or sightings simply skyrocketed. So the question is, what was particularly happening so disastrous that it would attract the attention of extraterrestrial and make them want to check on us and maybe save us? Well, on the top of my head, I can just mention a couple, let's say Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs. And also, it's no secret that the sightings of extraterrestrial or some weird stuff in the sky have been spotted in the places where there is high military activity. For example, in the late World War II, US airmen called them Foo Fighters, strange orange flying lights by the French-German border. During the Korean War, some soldiers claimed a blue-green light emitting pulsing rays made their whole battalion sick with what to some resembled radiation poisoning. And the last mention about kinda looking like an atomic poisoning, it reminded me of another video that I made on my channel. It was a story about 2 guys who saw aliens in Finland in Järvi. So if you haven't seen that video, check out, I will link that below. And now back to the Spitsbergen story. In fact, there have been 2 UFO crashes, as people are saying and talking and speculating up to nowadays. The first one happened during the 1940s, and the second one happened during the 1950s. And no surprise that Americans again appear in that story. I mean, no UFOs can visit us without the American attention. So the first alleged crash, the first case of UFOs visiting Spitsbergen, dates back to 1946. And it started with an article that was written by an American journalist, Dorothy Kilgallen. So the US military allegedly noticed this article, and the fuss started from there. What is more, the Americans allegedly managed to arrive in Spitsbergen, and they collected whatever was there. Maybe that was an extraterrestrial vehicle, maybe there was some aliens they found there, and allegedly they managed to take all of that they found there to US to further investigate. All of this story was allegedly confirmed also by now retired Navy officers who said that they've been working on a battleship called USS Alabama, and that ship was exactly the same that took all of these extraterrestrial remains back to the US. And if you're a frequent guest on my channel, and if not, I'm just gonna remind that the same year when this alleged crash happened in Spitsbergen, 1946, that was the year when the ghost rockets started to appear in the sky of Scandinavia. Maybe this was just a part of all of this extraterrestrial visit thing happening around that time in Scandinavia. And General James H. Doolittle, and if you've seen the video of ghost rockets, you already know that not only him, but also some other important American men came to Scandinavia during that time. Particularly, they were sent kinda to Sweden to do some business, to visit oil shale company, but in fact, we all know that that's bullshit. Those guys, including Mr. Doolittle here, were sent to Sweden to investigate the phenomena of the ghost rockets in the sky. There are many controversies and questions and rumors in regards to this crash that happened in Spitsbergen in 1946. To understand whether this story is real, we have to go back to the main source that started this fuss, namely this American journalist Dorothy Kilgallen. And to understand if she is reliable, because, you know, there are some gossip columnists who can write whatever just to have attention, we have to a little bit dive into her personality. Who is she? Can we believe her? And I guess with this video, I will try to prove that there is quite a high credibility to this person. Some sources, in fact, claim that Kilgallen was approached by some source who was like a high-ranked person in British government, and this source told her that actually the remains of this UFO was collected and later investigated both by British and American governments. The suspicious thing about all of this is that there's no real documentation that we can read and see that there has been indeed a British government person approaching Kilgallen, and from that she developed her article. And also, we do not really know if General Doolittle, let's say, visited Spitsbergen to see what was happening there. But then again, we have to bear in mind that he was already visiting Sweden under the cover of visiting oil shale company, so might as well hide his trip to Spitsbergen, you know? But again, I just want to go back to this journalist, to this Dorothy Kilgallen, because in fact, she was the main person who managed to spill the tea about the UFO crash. And my research into Dorothy Kilgallen really took me into deep waters, like really deep waters, but it kind of left me with the aftertaste that we can rely on her. She started to look into really serious topics that later on didn't play in favor of her, you know? I mean, she was silenced. Yeah, like... So who is Dorothy? During the 40s and 50s, she was a very well-known columnist on different newspapers. She was also a panelist on a TV show in America called What's My Line? And she also covered afterwards politics and crime. And the last things really brought her into a lot of trouble. The only thing that is like a little bit confusing is that there was a time when she was doing a show business gossip column, which could like reduce her credibility, but later on, as you will see in this video, she proved that she's a serious lady and she has the gut to speak out about the topics that are not convenient. You see, Kilgallen started to look into and talk about the topic that's, oh my, so painful for different American government institutions and government in general. And this topic is still very confusing up to nowadays. I mean, they're pretending that we already know the answers, but then again, we really don't know the answers. We just have more questions. And yes, I'm talking about the assassination of JFK. At first, Kilgallen wrote several articles about this subject, and later on, she ended up interviewing Jack Ruby. If you're not really into this topic of JFK and what really happened, I mean, we all know who killed him and what's like the common theory about it, but you know, there's more than that, so we're not gonna go very deep into that. But in short, Jack Ruby murdered Lee Harvey Oswald, who was the supposed killer of JFK. This in turn brings us to a thing called Warren Commission that was established by US President Lyndon B. Johnson to investigate the assassination of JFK. It concluded that President Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald and that Oswald acted entirely alone. It also concluded that Jack Ruby acted alone when he killed Oswald 2 days later. The Commission's findings have proven controversial and have been both challenged challenged and supported by later studies. And Dorothy Kilgallen was among those who was not afraid to publicly criticize the conclusions of Warren Commission. She was, in fact, not afraid to challenge the Oswald did it alone theory. As I mentioned, this lady here, she managed to interview Ruby. It happened in 1964, but afterwards, she somehow managed to obtain the testimony that Ruby gave to Warren Commission. And what she did was she published it in 3 installments. She published it on New York Journal American, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Seattle Post Intelligencer, and some other newspapers. And let's not forget the involvement of CIA, the alleged. If you know how to Google, please Google that topic, because this is dirty, this is crazy. It's alleged that CIA was actually hiding a lot of really important things from the Warren Commission, who are making the conclusions about this JFK assassination case. And also they hid everything in general from American public and from the world. Now you understand how deep did this journalist, Dorothy Kilgallen, managed to get, and what was the threat of her presence and her attempts to speak out. On November the 8th, 1965, Dorothy Kilgallen was found dead in her own townhouse in Manhattan. So she was fully dressed, sitting upright in her own bed. And there are some things that people speculate looked like really staged, like there was an empty bottle of some sleeping pills and also some alcohol on her nightstand. Her death was determined to have been caused by a combination of alcohol and barbiturates. The police said that there was no indication of violence or suicide. According to New York City Medical Examiner, the circumstances of her death were undetermined, but emphasized that the overdose could well have been accidental. Hello? Seems like Marilyn Monroe was not the only one who was suicided. For me, it looks like that was kind of way how they got rid of people who was related to the Kennedys in a certain way that could endanger some institutions. So a lawyer and veteran author, his name was Mark Shaw, looked into the life of Dorothy Kilgallen. He actually wrote a book called The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, and he found a lot of good stuff that just signifies that there was a foul play. Actually, Kilgallen died weeks before a planned trip. It was already the second trip that she was planning to New Orleans. And there she was supposed to meet a very important secret informant. And she told the story to her friend. And she said, I'm going to break the real story and have the biggest scoop of the century. One of the friends also recalled that before the trip to New Orleans, she actually said that if the wrong people knew what I know about the JFK assassination, it would cost me a life. Some other acquaintances of Dorothy Kilgallen came forward saying that Dorothy had managed to find a lot in discrepancies in the Warren Commission, and she said that she knew that there have been a lot of very important witnesses that were not even called out to give testimony in this commission. And also she said that she has very interesting and important information about Ruby that wasn't known to the public. Another interesting fact is in regard to the autopsy of Kilgallen's body. So it was done by the Brooklyn office, not Manhattan. That's where she lives. And this is very unusual practice, and it has never been really explained why it happened like that. Also interesting, Mr. Shaw, who was writing this book about Kilgallen's life, said that the policeman never really took any fingerprints and did not really treat her apartment as a place that could be a place of a possible crime. And also he said that a person named Jack Doyle, who was the detective assigned to investigate the case of the death of Kilgallen, he flew from New York a couple of months after he investigated this case, and afterwards all of his life he's been like moving from one state to another state. Quite weird. Why? And of course all of her notes, drafts, and the text that she was working on, including the interview with Ruby and whatever, most probably also if it was real, the UFO case of Spitsbergen, all of that mysteriously disappeared after her death. Also, under the Freedom of Information Act, Mr. Shaw, who was writing the book about Kilgallen, obtained some FBI files on Kilgallen. So this means that she was under the surveillance of FBI. In the files where FBI covered Kilgallen's work on the assassination of JFK, Hoover allegedly wrote with capital letters wrong. And he was allegedly infuriated when he noticed that Kilgallen had published Ruby's testimony from the Warren Commission. As for me, it looks like Dorothy Kilgallen was onto something really good, and this is why all of these important people were so scared. They actually felt threatened, and I am not saying anything, but I guess this just shows that her death most probably was not incidental drinking of alcohol together with sleeping pills or something. Not saying anything. You have your brain, do your own conclusions, as I did. Now, where does this bring us? Why was I telling all of this story about Dorothy Kilgallen and stuff? Well, the thing is that although there's not so much information about the UFO crash of 1946 in Spitsbergen, we do know that there was a lady who was reporting about that. And this lady, if you would doubt her words, that would not be quite logic, because this lady has guts and she covers really sensitive topics, sometimes that some institutions would like to hide. So in my opinion, if that article about UFO in Spitsbergen from Dorothy Kilgallen existed, it was reliable. We can believe that. And also it raises a lot of speculation is that I couldn't find actually the article that she supposedly wrote about the Spitsbergen accident. Apart from that, I think she is a reliable person. So the thing is about whether that article really existed. Also the fact that, well, we cannot ask her anything. She's dead. So it will always remain as a huge question if there was really a UFO crash on Spitsbergen in 1946, and did the Americans got it and did they manage to investigate it? Now remember at the beginning of this video I told you that there were specifically 2 UFO crashes in Spitsbergen, Norway that were kind of famous and that has risen a lot of questions and conspiracies. So this was the first one. It didn't have a lot of details, although it took me to this rabbit hole that I think was really, really exciting and interesting. These were the things that I didn't know. Personally, I didn't know that. And I hope you discovered something new for yourself too. So the second UFO case, that's gonna bring more details, even to an extent that there will be a description of a UFO vehicle. So I guess you would be very, very interested into knowing that. But I'm gonna tell you that I'm gonna put the full stop here and I'm gonna leave that second story for another video. So make sure you have subscribed, that you have pressed the notification bell, because you don't wanna miss that out. Yeah, see you next time.